jump up. Go tell Paige. I'll take care of the shield.
Shield activated. Shield disabled.
You're up.
Every year, E3 rolls around to show us what reboots and sequels everyone's working on that we already knew about. While most of the heavy hitters at recent conferences past are always revealed a week beforehand or leaked prematurely, there are always those holdout games everyone hopes and prays gets dropped at the tail end of one of the conferences. Among these legendary titles is the ever-elusive Beyond Good and Evil 2. After years of watching the anticipation at Ubisoft's press conferences infuriate people to no end, I decided to finally see what the fuss was all about. Turns out, I'm sorry to say, not much.
Jade! Hang on, Jade! I'm coming! Free yourself, Jade! I'll create a diversion!
Beyond Good and Evil, for those of you like myself who missed the boat in 2003, is about Jade, a journalist who finds herself entangled in the loosest thread of a conspiracy. Together with her pig uncle Peach, they attempt to find proof that the government that swears protection is actually working for the Doms, a mysterious alien race who kidnaps people to use as energy. That is as far as the story goes until literally the last 10 minutes of the game. All of a sudden, they dump a whole bunch of unfounded expository elements that would have been somewhat interesting if the game took the time to explore them properly. Unfortunately, the story and the characters are just not engaging simply because there isn't much for them to do beyond advancing the very basic plot. But that's okay, I can let that slide for this sort of third-person action game. It just doesn't help Beyond Good and Evil's case after all is said and done. I admire Beyond Good and Evil's old-school gameplay style. Similar to other games that were released around the same time, such as Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, or even Super Mario Sunshine, there's a heavy emphasis on the adventuring. The formula is one I wish more modern games employed. Throughout the game, you come across pearls that you acquire for doing any range of tasks, from winning hovercraft races to finding them off the beaten path, playing minigames, and so on. You need these pearls in order to purchase upgrades to reach new areas of the game, quite similar to how power cells worked in the original Jak and Daxter. I really missed this format of gameplay and was initially happy to find a game that I missed that employs it. Unfortunately, this old school format feels squandered in Beyond Good and Evil. This is due in part mostly to the game's length, which is around a meager 8 hours. I was initially impressed with how many pearls the game told me I could collect, until they dumped a whole lot of them on me for simply completing a story mission or two that brought me almost up to the quota I needed to reach the new area. There also isn't much in the way of variety when it comes to collecting the other pearls either. The occasional minigame, repetitive bandit chases, or simply buying them from vendors made up most of the rest. I can say that my favorite of these was taking pictures of wildlife found throughout the game, sort of like a scavenger hunt. It was a moment where a fun gameplay mechanic and progression were linked together. However, everything else just speaks to the narrow and small scope of Beyond Good and Evil. Sure, this might have passed in a pre-Mario 64 era, but by 2003 we already had Jak 2, which has a scope that is still mind-boggling today, and whose missions were all varied and interesting, to say nothing of the incredibly mature plot. Beyond Good and Evil also doesn't fare too well in the gameplay department. The game's puzzles were all fairly decent, making me scratch my head just long enough to make me feel good when I solved them, but none were particularly difficult. The other half of the gameplay involves light platforming and stealth sequences. However, the platforming mechanics simply aren't developed enough to be fun. Jade can run, grab onto ledges, and jump when prompted, but these prompts took away any danger of actually dying from platform-related injuries. Without a dedicated jump button, the game strips itself from any truly interesting exploration that comes from taking risks and experimenting. Don't get me started on the combat either, which consists of pushing one button over and over again to combo with the occasional side dodge.
Ready to meet your maker, jelly brains!
The The stealth sequences are also another large chunk of the game, and they would have worked so much better if they weren't so frequent or marred by a terrible camera. They quickly became repetitive and dull as you waited to figure out screen after screen of enemy patterns by using the stiffest camera this side of Resident Evil. And God help you if you're playing this game on PC, which has no controller support. I began to dread these sequences that unfortunately comprised most of the experience.
Something's over there! I'm going! Intruder! Intruder!
This may all seem negative, but Beyond Good and Evil really isn't a bad game. It's just incredibly mediocre when you take into account other games released around the same time or earlier that were doing the same thing, but better. The world of Hillis, as thin as it is, still boasts an interesting eclectic style that is certainly French, if not anything else, and the gameplay as a whole is relatively varied if skewed too much in the stealth department. If you haven't played Beyond Good and Evil and are wondering what all the fuss is about, I would strongly caution against playing it, especially if you only have the PC version available to you. I can't say I'm against the idea of Beyond Good and Evil 2, if only for the sake of seeing an old school gameplay format resurrected, but I would much rather everyone jumped on the Jak 4 bandwagon instead.
Just say when, Jay!